How to protect your research ideas from being stolen. Now, I have experienced idea theft basically in various ways. It ranges from basically seeing an entire paper of mine copied word by word, including all of the figures, and then published under somebody else's name. That is, of course, an extreme case of fraud and academic misconduct. And it ranged all the way to pitching a research idea to a network of scientists that work on a particular experiment, and then seeing basically a few weeks later that same idea pitched by somebody else who was in the email list. And so basically the message is, this does happen. Science is done by people, and of course there are all kinds of people, from villains to saints. Now, of course, this is a much more significant problem for a junior researcher than, let's say, an established researcher, because for a junior researcher much more is at stake if some of their ideas are being taken by somebody else. Now, this is of course a very tricky subject, because I am a firm believer in sharing ideas and being open about one's ideas, because this is of course how science makes progress, right? I mean, it is so important to pitch your ideas to others and get some feedback so you can refine your ideas, or maybe ditch ideas that are not going to go anywhere, right? I mean, so this dialogue with other scientists is just essential, and I think this is important to have and to maintain. But at the same time, I think it's also an important piece of advice to junior scientists to be a little bit careful about it. Not paranoid, but just a bit more careful. And of course there is different kinds of ideas, right? I mean, there is an idea for a next experiment that is a pretty straightforward extension from what has already been done. But maybe then there are also ideas that could be potentially transformative, and that are not ideas that just anybody could have easily developed. Of course, which is difficult to judge for me, even now, but there is clearly different qualities of ideas. And I think you will most of the time have at least kind of a feeling for the relative quality of, let's say, a given idea. So I think that this means that if you believe you have an excellent idea, something that is unusual and is not just a straightforward extension from what has already been done, then I think it's good to take some precaution. And then what may be some very good ideas for you to do to protect this a little bit? Now, there was recently a feature in Nature by Dr. Opara. I'm going to link to the article in the description. And I think the suggestions that she made are very useful, and I'm going to list them here and also comment on them from my perspective and also add to them. The first point is that if you believe you have a really important idea, is to pitch that idea and discuss that idea and share that idea for sure, but maybe not quite as open, but with a trusted circle of people. I definitely do this. Today I have some people that I would share any idea with in the lab, and also friends of the lab where I feel completely comfortable and safe. And I do share my ideas quite freely with these people. But it's not so open. Huh? It's a bit protected because it's a trusted circle of people. So I think that would be my first suggestion. Also for you, if you believe you have a really transformative and great idea, of course you need to share and discuss that idea. You cannot just hold it back to yourself, but then maybe don't share it on Twitter, but make it a discussion in a trusted circle of people. The second point she makes in that article is to prioritize output. I certainly do that, even today. So basically, if I think there is a great idea out there and we cannot really immediately work on it because we don't have the capacity to do it, don't have the methods to do it, or it would take very long to do an experiment on it, one way to do this is to write an opinion and viewpoint paper. So basically, you have tagged that idea already with your name. And this is what prioritizing output could mean. Of course, it could also mean you design an experiment, you do a study, and then you publish, for example, a preprint, because then you also have established priority for that idea. Even though it's not so clear how that preprint would be valued in connection with some other paper that that appears later on in a peer-reviewed journal, right? I mean, people would probably more perceive that paper in a peer-reviewed journal, but technically with a preprint publication, you have established priority. So this means if you really believe you have a good idea, act on it. Don't sit on it for a long period of time, but really get busy and produce some output in the ways that I've explained. I mean, Dr. Opara also mentions that in her group they have a system where they come to a verbal or written agreement about what and what cannot be shared. We don't have that in my group. I'm not quite so sure how I would do that, but in your particular situation, your particular field, or in your particular context, for example, also in industry, this may be a really good way to go. And the last point is many ideas are actually born out of labs, I think. When there are discussions in lab meetings about a certain point, and it typically happens that one idea builds on another idea, builds on another idea. Because I think very often this is the way this happens in some sort of brainstorming session after discussion of a paper or something. These ideas don't, I think, routinely happen with some people sitting in a room by themselves, mulling things over. Of course, it can also happen, but I think there are certain dynamic situations like in a lab context where ideas are just born. In these cases, I think it's important to try to keep track of the provenance of ideas. Where do the ideas come from and who had like a decisive input? I mean, I try to do that in lab discussions when, for example, I pitch an idea and then other people give me their input. Then as I subsequently write a paper, I try to put these people as co-authors that made substantial contributions to the development of the idea, putting the idea in a broader context or whatever the case may be. That's not so easy to do, right, in these dynamic situations where things build on each other, because, you know, how are you going to value, for example, those intermediate steps? Now, I don't really know how to do that. So, I mean, if you have an idea or if you have an established protocol in your situation, I'd love to hear from you about it. So I think these are some of the points to consider. I think it is still important to go forward not being paranoid and not assuming that people will steal an idea, because, you know, most people are honest people. The overwhelming majority of people are interested in giving credit where credit is due. And it can also happen that maybe ideas are taken sort of inadvertently, because as they were, you know, created in sort of this soup of you know, ideas being bounced around, it may be no longer so clear who actually in the end came up with something, if it was an important idea. Well, I hope this discussion is useful to you. I think it is maybe a starting point of a discussion rather than a final solution. But I think it is also important to just keep this in mind. I mean, many people would also say ideas are not worth that much, because what really counts is what in the end you make of it. You know, there is a major effort and a major step involved in translating some ideas into workable experimental or sampling designs, for example, and then having the knowledge to set these things up and the skills. This is undeniably the case, that ideas are for sure not everything. That is clear. But I think there are ideas and there are ideas, right? I mean, there are certain ideas that really change maybe potentially the way people think about their field. And those ideas are not so easy to come by. Whereas, you know, it seems like some ideas, they are simultaneously popping up in the heads of many people because they're just ripe, given this has happened and now that has happened. So maybe now this is the next logical step to do that. I mean, this is still a good idea, but these ideas are sort of more a natural consequence of what has happened before. But there are also ideas that come more out of left field, you know, transfers from other areas of science or something that not everybody is going to have at the same time. And I think it's mostly these ideas that we're talking about here. And so with that, good luck with getting ideas in the first place. It's really hard to get a very good idea. And share your ideas, but also be careful about who you share your ideas with. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.